Well, welcome. My name is Jeff Dalrymple. I'm the Executive Director at ECAP Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention to make sure you're in the same or the right Zoom room. Welcome, everyone. I'm here in Jacksonville, Florida, where it's a beautiful day. I hope it's a beautiful day where you're at. I want to quickly introduce the rest of our team, and then we'll get to talking about accreditation with ECAP and what we're going to do. Our format here today is Jeremy Herron, who's worked closely with us through this auditing and really is going to share a little bit about his experience building a process. So agenda today, of course, questions, but via Slido. So we'll post the link in the chat here. So be thinking about your questions and drop those in. We'll be monitoring those. And later on in our time, we'll get to answering your questions. Anything that we don't get to today, of course, feel free to reach out. We'll share our contact information. You can also contact us through the ECAP website, but we're here to serve you. So first of all, Brigham Winkler, can you wave there on your screen? Brigham Winkler is also here in Jacksonville, Florida, and he is our general editor. We've also got Jesse Maynor from Tampa, Florida, who is our accreditation program manager, and he just disappeared, but he was there momentarily. Maybe he'll be back soon. And Jeremy Herron, who we feel is an adopted team member, honestly. Jeremy is he oversees kids ministry at Providence Church in Frisco, Texas, so north of the DFW Metroplex area. And he's also the founder of Fortified Consulting. So welcome to our friends here. We're going to keep everything else muted just so we can remove any sort of distractions with the audio and the recording that we're doing. But be sure to, if you're just joining us, post your name, your role, and the ministry that you work with in the chat so we can kind of just see who's here with us. Let me introduce to you just briefly, Evangelical Council for Abuse Prevention. You can read more about our ministry, our board, our advisory board, or statement of faith on our website. But we started in 2019. We spent 2 years developing child safety standards for ministries. And we did that through a known process that's common in the accreditation standards world, where we involved everyone from the field, including ministry practitioners, those who are on the front lines. Because what we wanted the child safety standards to accomplish was child safety, certainly, but we also had a mission to accomplish. And so we engaged Jeremy Herron was actually on that standard committee representing the church perspective. We had a camp ministry involved and also an administrator from a Christian school with ACSI. So those first couple of years were key in developing those industry standards, and that's really our public charity. That information is freely available on our website. If you've never checked it out, feel free to read the standards, read the suggested best practices and the commentary there, and use that as a guide or a benchmark in your child protection ministry. And then we spent the next couple of years developing an accreditation program. We did that. Jesse has honestly had the lion's share of the work in developing that accreditation program, but we work closely with our friends at ACSI, Association of Christian Schools International. We're so thankful for them, their friendship and their partnership in this. And we've also consulted with ECFA, Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability, which we view as a sister ministry. We're grateful for them. Our statement of faith is also adapted from their ministry that Billy Graham started 40 some odd years ago to address accountability in the financial world for Christian ministries. So our accreditation program launched in January this month. We've been open for a few weeks, and we've been encouraged to see ministries coming in as candidates and also a growing network of resources to support you in your work. You know, ECAP is not here to be an end-all be-all. We're an association-based organization, so we're dependent on many providers to help you and other Christian ministries achieve their goals in child protection. So these affiliate members include background screening companies and abuse prevention training. In the response and care area, we have engaged with counseling ministries and licensed therapists to care for survivors of abuse, regardless of whether that abuse has taken place in the ministry context or without. and also investigation firms. So we're helping to spread the word, both about our ministry for youth and children serving organizations in the United States, but also for affiliate organizations. So feel free to reach out, spread the word about who we are and what we do. Our mission is really quite simple. It's actually not about accreditation. That's just symbolic. But our goal is to come alongside of you on the front lines of ministries to help keep kids safe so that they can hear the gospel and they can grow in discipleship. We do this because, well, we believe it's the right thing to do. These vulnerable persons are, we believe, image bearers of God, right? Created in the image of God. And so we do this for his glory. We also do this as a matter of biblical stewardship. And we also believe that this is a matter of Great Commission importance because, sadly, the stories that we hear about abuse, especially abuse in a ministry context, most survivors from a ministry context are not following Jesus. They are not involved in their local church, and many of them have rejected the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so we want to go upstream to help keep kids safe so that we can continue to do the ministry that we've been called to do. Thanks for joining us here. Again, if you're just joining us, be sure to just drop in your contact, or rather your name and your role and the ministry that you represent here in the chat so we can see where you're from. All right, well, that's a little bit about ECAP. Again, I encourage you to check out our website and learn more. And now I'm going to turn over to our very special guest, Jeremy Herron at Providence Church, Frisco, Texas. Jeremy, you're going to tell us a little bit about your experience going through the accreditation process, but even before that, building out your child protection program. Would you take it away?
You bet. To give you a little bit of background on who I am and where I'm coming from, I've been in Texas all my life. Started teaching kindergarten Sunday school at the age of 13 with an adult volunteer. My mom oversaw the kids ministry there, had zero intention of going into ministry. In fact, I went into teaching, became a public school teacher. And as I was on my way to becoming a principal, our pastor called me and basically said, "Hey, what you're doing out there, come do that in here." And after I politely declined, we had a few more conversations about that. And I said yes 9 years ago and have been overseeing our kids ministry for the past 9 years and absolutely love it. Of top concern to me when I first came into the ministry was ensuring that our kids are safe. And it wasn't just a platitude, but really having the mindset of and the mindset came from when I was teaching in public school was this, my classroom in that public school might be the only safe place that kid has to go to. If they're in an abusive home, if they are in an after school program, I'm going to guarantee that these hours that they're with me are a safe place to be. And that really translated to ministry. And so ensuring that this church, the classrooms inside of the kids' hallway, the teachers that they're with, all of those are going to be safe places for these kids to come and hear the gospel. The idea that kids would be hindered from hearing the gospel because they were fearful of where they were, absolutely, that would keep me up at night. And so we started off, I got to start fresh with a ministry that had been in the hands. I was the sixth person in 6 years to oversee our kids ministry, and got to come in and really just revamp and say, I'm in this for the long haul. What can we do? And I was given a book called On Guard by Deepak Rishu. And that book, if you don't own that book, you need to own that book. It was a great jumping off platform to get started on how to think about the different areas of kids ministry that I didn't even know existed, or I didn't see the value sometimes in this little niche part of the ministry. And that book opened up my eyes, and really, I still have my copy, and it's just underlined and beaten up because I just carried it around with me. That held us for a pretty long while. We increased safety measures for our teachers. We started, parents could see a difference in the way that our classrooms were run. and just really solid bolstering of the ministry. And so we got to revamp a lot of things, set up some new policies. Fast forward a good handful of years, I believe 6 years into the ministry, and Jeff called up and said, "Hey, we're wanting to effectively create national standards for church safety. Would you come be a part of that? We've heard good things about Providence. Would love to have you help us look through this from the pastoral lens." And we did. And even through those conversations with lawyers and through forensic nurses and through insurance guys and heads of schools, those conversations again further clarified that what we were doing were good things, and also we had room to improve. And so we had lessons that we needed to learn as well. Once the accreditation program really got grounded, we got to walk through that and make even more changes, and have learned a good amount of lessons from that. And here we are. We were officially accredited at the end of last year as the first organization to be accredited. And man, our people, not just our volunteers, but the people at our church see a difference, and they know about it. And praise God for all the conversations that it's led to.
Jeremy, that's fantastic. Remember, friends, just as you think of your questions, drop it there into the Slido link. Jeremy, give us some more detail. Where did you start? I understand you took On Guard and used the ECAP standards as a reference point, but go a little bit deeper. Tell us a little bit through the process. What was that like? What did you find challenging, and what are some helpful resources?
Yeah, I think from the get-go, what I inherited was a ministry that we did background checks. We had a person fill out an application, and then they were called on to serve at that point. There was some training in some of the policies and procedures that were there at the time. I think there were some of the biggest changes that we made were having an interview with every single volunteer, and that means that everybody kind of got to re-up and sort of reapply for their job. But it was primarily because there were people serving in the ministry that I didn't know and I couldn't vouch for, but I inherited. And so we went forth and just said, hey, in all humility, what we want to do is revitalize this space to ensure that we're doing everything we can to be a safe ministry. And our volunteers agreed. We went through a process where we had everybody reapply, hoping and praying that they would stay and that they wouldn't take this way out, but also knowing that that was a possibility. And for the health of the ministry, we were going to go through those steps. And so we interviewed every single person new, got to hear their heart, got to hear what changes they would make. And then we set out with the task of redoing everything from the way that the kids were checked in, having tags that were checking in, checking out. We weren't writing things on paper anymore, but we were trying to keep track of them digitally. We changed up the ratios inside of rooms, again, based on some of the things that we read in On Guard. I think at some point before me, there were a couple of, I don't know that they were policies, but they were definitely rules that were encouraged, where if a woman who's married would like to serve in Providence Kids, her husband would also need to serve. That was one of the early rules. And I just did away with that one and said, absolutely, if you want to serve in this ministry, we want you here. If you don't want to serve in this ministry, there are other ministries to serve in. And so we want all of our members to serve, but there's no requirement if you drop off your child that that's no longer a requirement, that if you contribute to this ministry, we want you to also participate in this ministry. For some parents, this hour-long service is where you just need to go and lay your life at the foot of the cross inside the sanctuary, and you don't need to come back here and be with 15 kids. That's not what's best for your soul. And so we did away with some rules that seemed to bring more problems than they solved, if that makes sense. We looked at what the teachers were required to do, and by that I mean beforehand they were largely in charge of kind of coming up with how they would teach the story, and so we started bringing in curriculum, and man, we really looked at every component. We learned early on that our blind spots are things that we can't see, and so we need somebody else to show them. And On Guard helped us to see what our blind spots were. We didn't really keep any documentation on things other than background checks, and those were not always done. We definitely re-upped background checks and the volunteer application. We just, we looked at everything fresh eyes and said, we don't know how to change things that are blind to us, because that's the definition of a blind spot. This book has looked at multiple angles of children's ministry, and there are things that we haven't thought of, like parent engagement, or what are we going to do if a divorced couple comes in and mom drops off but dad wants to pick up? What are we going to do about that? So many things that we just hadn't considered because they hadn't happened yet. And I think that's one of the most eye-opening parts of all this, is that so often we react to a situation that's new because we hadn't prepared for it. It's never happened before. When in reality, the best possible thing we can do is plan for these things, use the resources around us, so that we can learn from somebody else's adventures, if you will, and be able to use those for our benefit.
Jeremy, talk about leadership. They've got an important role in this process. What about talk to us about I think you have an elder model at your church there, and of course, staff pastors. Were they supportive? How did you get them on board?
Yeah, great question. Largely supportive to come in and make changes. They would support anything that made our church a safe place to be. Early on, we were pretty short on volunteers, and so we came up with some strategic plans on how to recruit volunteers and how to keep volunteers. The goal, some of the encouragement from leaders were from our elders, were that we wanted to make serving similar to tithing, that serving in the church should be an overflow of the heart, something we get to do based off of the gifts that God's given us, and not something that we have to do. And so we were trying to change the mindset. And so they communicated that to the people. We brought in people who just had a passion for kids, and all of that was supported by elders. I was really encouraged by elders. We had pushback from various teachers who said, we like it the way it was. We don't think all of these other steps are necessary, and why can't we just stay the way we are? And when I took some of these early on to our one of our elders, he said, "Hey, whose name is on the business card?" And I said, "Mine." He goes, "All right, that's great. You lead the way. They will follow you, and if they don't, that's okay." We had a moment where we as a staff were empowered to go and really stand for truth, stand for stand for the way that biblically we feel called to lead this church. We didn't want to get in the way of that, and so the elders didn't give free rein, but they definitely encouraged, as long as we could show that we were doing what's in the best interest of the ministry, and that lines up with what's in the best interest of the church. The rest, what they've done is really encouraged humility in the leaders, by saying, hey, we're all after one mission. The mission of the church is to make disciples. We do that through the gospel. We do it in community, and we do it on mission. As long as what we're doing falls inside of those buckets, man, the elders are supportive of that. Inside of the support, our original budget, I know there's lots of churches represented here, but our original budget when I came on board was $7,000 a year. And I think $2,500 of that went to curriculum, and about $2,000 of that went to Goldfish. And we were left with very little for the rest of the year. And one of the ways that leaders really encouraged was to open that up a little bit and to say, we want to bless our volunteers and our workers. We want to provide breakfast. Sometimes that's going to be breakfast tacos. Sometimes that's just going to be, bagels. But we want to make it easy for our volunteers to get here. And so we didn't lure them in with free breakfast. We never promoted that, but what we did was, as they're going through their application process, when they get to those final steps, we said, hey, for the record, now that you're part of the team, I want to invite you to breakfast. And when you get here, it should be one less thing on your mind when you leave the door. And so the elders really allowed us to find creative ways to strengthen our ministry. That was another one of those. It's been neat. It's been encouraging to have leadership who absolutely is for the ministry. It might be harder sometimes on leadership because it does create more steps, but they see value in that and seized onto it.
Jeremy, let's talk more specifically about the accreditation process. You were a part of the standards creation, so you kind of had a heads up, and you were obviously building your child protection program based on guard principles around that same time. And then we approached you, and you started coming in to do the accreditation process. Where did you start? And describe that process, would you?
You bet. We look at our policies every year, and we try to again look at them as though we were coming into them for the first time, and what works, what doesn't work, what used to fit and what still fits. So when we did have a little bit of insight into the standards just with the work I had done to help create them, but also we had quite a few things that we learned. An easy one to identify is how much documentation we had, and I had the realization actually when we were creating the standards that Providence Church, man, we were doing great things in the realm of child safety, doing great things. And if something ever went awry and I was asked to prove it, that would be a really difficult task for me to do. And the question we continue to ask ourselves is, we do these great things, but can we prove that we do? Would we be able to have somebody who, let's say that they left Providence and they committed a pretty serious crime, and we were called into question of, could this have happened there? Could we document anything that person had been trained on? No, but we did trainings, but we didn't have attendance for that, and we didn't keep track of what we taught. We just taught our policies and procedures. They didn't have to sign anything at the trainings. They signed something in the original interview. And so lots of documentation changes were made with the bolstering that ECAP gave us. ECAP really gave us a lot of platforms and a lot of structure on thinking through how do we prove the good things that we do. And so we got to work making changes. I think one of the hardest things that we did through the ECAP process, the most challenging thing was we had a child protection policy. We had a Providence kids policy and procedure. We had Providence students, our youth group policy and procedure. We had community groups had their own policy and procedure. And while they all said the same thing generally, because of the languages that were used in each individual document, they didn't line up the way we wanted them to. And ECAP made us really lay everything out on the table and say, are you really looking at this through a continuous lens through all of your different documents? Do you see conformity between your ministries, or is everything so disjointed that it makes it more difficult to understand the church's stance? We realized that in unifying all of our policies and procedures, it actually makes it easier for volunteers to move from one ministry to another, because things don't change drastically anymore. Like there's not a huge learning curve to move. If you're in Providence students and you want to come join Providence kids, there's a pretty easy entry point now because so much of the language is the same. And so that really helped our church. That was one of the big hurdles that we had to jump over, was looking at it and unifying things. I think ECAP also really helped us in looking through our response plan. So I feel like we had a solid grounding on, here are the procedures that we have. We have and got these in place. But what we had kind of just taken from our the church that planted us was a response plan, and it was okay. But I feel so much more confident now about how our church would respond if there was ever an allegation or anything. I think we as a staff, and even our volunteers, and to a degree, our parents know what our response would be if there was ever an allegation, because we've opened this conversation up to the congregation. Sorry, we've opened up the conversation to the congregation.
So to and what kind of feedback or input did you get?
You broke up a little bit. Did you ask about feedback from the congregation?
Yeah, on ECAP accreditation, what was the feedback you received?
A couple of different things. One, our volunteers who had to now jump through, a few extra hoops that we were asking them to do in order to be compliant with ECAP standards. Zero pushback from our volunteers. We expected, in fact, in our hearts, we expected way more pushback than we actually got. I think our fear was, oh no, we've made this more difficult for them, when really what we've done through changing things to be ECAP accredited, what we've done is actually shown them, one, how serious we take this, two, to what ends we're willing to be a safe place for these kids, but not only for these kids, but also for these volunteers. And so they see the work that the leadership has put in to make their life more secure. They are less worried about allegations because everybody knows all the pieces, and they see a cohesiveness in our volunteers that they didn't previously see. I think they were more than willing to sign the extra documents and to come to an extra training because it helped protect them as well as the kids. And so that was really encouraging that they didn't have that. So the other thing was we opened up some of our training, specifically our child protection and abuse prevention training, to the congregation. And we said, hey, what we believe what we have always believed is for our volunteers. Why would we hold this back from the rest of the congregation? What we want is for our entire church body to be aware that there's evil in the world and that the light of Christ can come in and enter into that space. And so we said, hey, we have an abuse prevention training coming up on this particular date. Come join us for that conversation. It is not just for our volunteers, but you who are in the grocery store, who are at a school event, who are on the soccer field, can recognize these signs of abuse, and you would be more equipped to know how to handle that. What we wouldn't want is to send you out into the world and you don't know what to do. And so the response from the congregation on that was incredible. We had people who didn't serve in our kids ministry, didn't serve in our youth ministry, show up to these trainings and ask great questions. We had great conversations about how can the light of Christ enter into such a dark space, and is it okay that we leave this as a dark space? No, because there is no such thing when you bring Jesus into it. So having the conversations of abuse is real, and it happens to 1 in 4 people, that they took that and have taken it to heart. And we actually have stories of people who have noticed these things, called me and said, hey, here are the things that I noticed. Would you walk with me? And can we call CPS? Is this something worthy of calling CPS? Can we call them together? But praise God that there's that awareness out in, again, the soccer fields and the grocery stores. The other response that we got, which I thought was, this is both the most encouraging and the heartbreaking part of this, is when we sit down and we go through with new volunteers. They come into the ministry and we sit down and we say, hey, we take abuse prevention very seriously. We want this to be a safe place. And so here are the precautions that we have set up in our ministry. The response from volunteers occasionally, not every time, but occasionally, is thank you so much for the work that you're doing, for even opening up that conversation, which is awkward and can be taboo depending on how you present it. But they are so grateful that we have that conversation because that's their story. And so it's heartbreaking because you hear the pain of past abuse. And it's encouraging because they want to be part of something that prevents that from happening to other people. And so we just, weep with them and we pray with them and thank them for their courage to speak up. I think that we have the same percentage of people who've been abused in our church, but my guess is that we know more of those people than other churches who aren't having these conversations, because we're willing to open that up and say, man, Jesus can enter into this space too. And it's been a really beautiful thing in our church to just see people who are hurt and open up in ways that they really haven't opened up to others before. It's been good.
Thanks for sharing. I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to start taking questions from our audience here. Tell us about the Child Safety Coordinator. What is that role and what does that look like at your church?
Yeah, Child Safety Coordinator is a role that is really encouraged through the ECAP standards. At our church, that's her name is Melanie Boyd, and she really took lead on walking us through what it would look like to be ECAP accredited. So what changes need to be made. She formed up a team that includes the pastor and the executive pastor and a couple of key volunteers who think well in this space. She helped manage that. And then as we as a team would see the ECAP standard and the indicator inside of that standard that said, hey, you need to think about this aspect of your ministry, whether that was, let's just keep it as, you need to consider a check-in and check-out procedure for children. The team would discuss that and really whatever we came up with, the child safety coordinator is really the person who's going to go and implement that, or really lead the charge on that. They are the ones ensuring that things, that all of the checkboxes get checked for ECAP accreditation, for keeping the kids safe. They are the ones who call a meeting if there's ever an allegation that parents or teachers, anybody can email the email address that we have posted up inside of our church, saying this is an email address that you can reach our child safety team. And then the coordinator would assemble that to be a meeting and say, hey, we need to look at this. Is this something that we hand off to the outside? Is this something that we can so is this something that we take internally? And she has been a true blessing. But it also, in creating a child safety coordinator, it allowed me to continue doing my job while she ran point on ECAP accreditation. I think that's one of the biggest helps that she could have done, is she took lead on a lot of that, so that it wasn't an extra workload on my end as much as it could have been.
Yeah, super. When we were creating the standards, we realized that there's a good amount of information out there on child protection. What does this look like? A number of providers that help in this area, of course, On Guard, the resource, and growing awareness. An issue that ECAP sees moving forward is yes, we need to continue to raise awareness and to educate what does child protection look like. But I think one of the big missing pieces moving forward is a management challenge, and that child safety coordinator is intended to help solve that management issue by having kind of a resident expert, if you will, on campus, your ministry, that understands policies and procedures, can be a resource to make sure that they're being followed, and knows, how to quickly respond when there's an allegation of abuse. And remember, when we think of abuse allegations, that could be internal within your ministry context or external, right? You might have a faculty member at your school or a volunteer at your church that sees some sort of signs of abuse in a child that's in one of your ministry programs. All right, we're gonna start taking some questions from our audience. The first one, Jeremy, is a little bit more detail on the child safety policies. I know you mentioned On Guard as a resource there. ECAP has a policy specific checklist as a resource, which we'll share here in the link. But tell us a little bit more. How did you develop those policies?
We took the ECAP, or the process that we used. We took the ECAP standards and indicators, and which are broken up into these 5 main categories. And we really just opened it up and said, okay, if the indicator says that we need a governing body, do we have one? Check. We have an elder board. Do they have documentation that they've met periodically, frequently? Yes, they do. Check. And so a lot of things that ECAP is promoting, every church is probably already doing. And so we started just checking the box. Yes, we have this. Yes, we have this. Some of those indicators that we would get to, we would say, well, we kind of do, but maybe not in the exact flavor that ECAP is asking us for. And so let's come back to that. And so those kind of got yellow highlighter. And then there were some that we weren't doing well, again, back to the documentation piece. And so we just highlighted those with pink and said, we're going to come back to this. We're missing this component of it. We looked at our policy and the youth policy primarily as the 2 main documents that we were using, and saying, do we have these? And so where the children's policy doesn't have an overnight policy, we don't have a travel policy, because we don't do those events in our kids ministry, but our students do. And so they have some of those indicators. That's the process of just laying out ECAP on one side of the table, all the indicators, laying our policies on the other side of the table, and just comparing notes back and forth. Do we have the things that would make us this level of safe? And so then I believe our next step, and again, this was as a team, we talked about if ECAP has these 5 main indicators, we should have, or sorry, 5 main topics there, the standards, we should have some of these topics inside of our policies. And so we kind of looked at a lot of the rules and grouped them together. I'm looking at our policy right now, and I can see that we have volunteer safety as one of our main points, and it's all sorts of things like what is appropriate touch and inappropriate touch. We have a whole section devoted to what is our worker screening process, and there are 9 steps that we have for our worker screening process that are indicated inside of our policy. Whether that's they need to have been here for 6 months, they're going to do a background check, we're going to check on their references, all sorts of things. And so we really grouped them into categories inside of our policy, and tried to help it be because we go through these policies with every single volunteer at every single interview. We sit down with the policies and procedures and walk through them. So every interview is 45 minutes or so, and then we sign off on the policy and procedures page stating, man, these are things that I've read. I've received a copy of these. Every volunteer gets a copy of them to go home with. Makes for fun reading at home, I'm certain. And so, but it is the founding documents of the way our kids ministry is operating. And we want to make sure that everybody is on board with operating this way.
Yeah, thank you for that. One other question we had, I'm just going to answer this really quick. Do we have a template that we could use for writing a child safety policy? The quick answer is no, and that's because so many ministries are so different. And typically in the U.S. and U.S. territories, it's a state law that regulates anything related to mandatory reporting laws. And in some states like California, which currently has the most stringent child protection training and screening laws in the nation, I think Pennsylvania is right behind them. But there's so many nuances to this that we wouldn't recommend a template, but contact us. Maybe Jesse could drop his email into the chat if he has it. Oh, he's done that already. But contact us. We've got a couple of great attorneys that they work with and policies. They're familiar with doing this, and one in South Carolina, they can work with questions for you in reference to asking for background information from volunteers. What if our state prevents us from asking this question? Can we still be accredited by ECAP? And this is referring to probably some of the ban the box kind of laws that we have in certain in the country.
Yeah, so the first thing I'll say is I'm actually just going to read from, if you go to our website where we have our child safety standards, this is in the comments section on indicator 3.7. So what I'm about to read is just straight from that. So if you're taking notes, you don't have to, you can just. So it says, some states have banned the box and similar laws that prohibit pre-employment inquiries about criminal backgrounds. These laws apply only to employees, not volunteers. For organizations in such jurisdictions, inquiries may be made only after an employee is hired. A satisfactory result should be a condition for continued employment with the organization, and this issue is similar to employee drug testing. So that's just in our standards. Now, I'm not a lawyer, and this is not legal advice, but I have done just a little bit of research on this, and my understanding is that the ban the box stuff, basically the purpose of it is to ensure that just a criminal history, the laws want to prohibit a criminal history from being the only reason that somebody's not fired, or they're not hired for a job, rather. So that's one part. But for pretty much all the states that I could find, criminal history you can't ask for criminal history, but it has to come like after the first interview, or it has to come after a conditional offer is made to the applicant. So I would say, these laws are going to be different state by state. So make sure to look at your own state's laws, and then make sure to just read them carefully. because I couldn't find any state laws that completely prohibit any sort of background screening from employees. And I think that's good that no states completely prohibit that. So.
And so the issue there is really a matter of sequencing, right? So you can still hire somebody and then conduct the background check. And then if you find something that's disqualifying in nature, you'd obviously want to work with an attorney if you're terminating for that purpose of something that you found. But yeah, if that doesn't quite answer your question, reach out to us and we'll either get you connected to some resources or an attorney in that state that has better understanding of that particular issue. So I hope that's helpful, but contact us if that still doesn't quite meet your needs. All right, Jesse, this question's for you. We have a preschool that meets in our church building. They operate independently from the church. Are they still included in the audit for ECAP accreditation?
Thank you, Jeff. That's a great question. And that's honestly a common situation that we definitely want those kids to be safe as well. So yes, we treat them as essentially a campus. So they're part of your legal entity and they are part of your responsibility. But whether it's based on state licensing requirements or the simple fact of age of kids or who's working there, your policy will probably need to be tailored and specific toward them. So they do fall under our accreditation, and you may well end up having a second policy that's specific to it, and that gets included. The documentation would be completed together, and then our audit would actually be just a single audit as well. It doesn't make it more complicated. Our auditors sort through that easily enough. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Jeremy, what surprises did you encounter as you went about installing these implementing them in your church context?
Oh man. Let's go with, I can think of some good surprises and some bad surprises. I think one of the good surprises that I found was I had the joy of running Providence Kids by myself for 6 years. And I say joy, obviously a little bit tongue in cheek. It was an overwhelming task. And I was very, very grateful when we hired somebody else to come alongside me. But when you bring a team of people together, that can sometimes, you have the potential to having too many cooks in the kitchen. The team that we put together with our child safety coordinator, with me and our pastors and our communications, and some of the volunteers, when we start looking at things like honestly, the man in the box conversation, I started remembering some of the conversations we've had around this. But when we have a volunteer who comes in and they do have blips on the radar as far as their background check is concerned, and they have anything from a DUI back in college 20 years ago to a charge for assault 8 years ago, it no longer was only on my shoulders to make a decision of, is this person welcome in our ministry or not? And it really opened up the doors for me to say, hey, here's the situation. I would like us all to look at the facts. Can we get consensus? The weight of it no longer falls on my shoulders. And so that was one of the surprises, is that in building out a team of people that I felt more supported than I felt hamstrung. And so I think I was surprised at how willing people were to jump on board with this. And so we have myself, we have staff members, but we also have volunteers who see such value in the way that we're doing this, with the importance in which we're showing this whole idea to be. Our volunteers stepped up and then some to be able to support this. I think I was surprised. I thought that if we are doing these new things, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, is a lot of people's mentality. But people saw the value in putting the work in up front, and it takes away the work that would follow. What I mean by that is, if you were to get an allegation of abuse at your church, and honestly, this is a fantastic question for a senior pastor to answer. But if you were to get an allegation of abuse at your church, how much money would it cost you? How many hours of your staff's time, your own time, your lawyer's time? Those are costly hours. How many hours would you need to put in if abuse were to have happened at your church? And you think about that number, and then you reframe the question and say, how many hours could we put in right now over the next 6 months to do everything we can to ensure that that other thing doesn't happen? And I guarantee you that this is a smaller number, both in money and in hours. And I think our people realized that, and that was such a joy to me, that it wasn't just leadership trying to do this new thing, but that our people were buying in. It helps it's such a bittersweet help, but the news stories that are constantly coming out about another case of abuse in the church, another mishap, the way a church mishandled it, those stories that ring so loudly on social media encouraged our people in what we were doing. And they said, oh man, can you go and help this other church? And so I think those were surprises, how on board people were to support what we were doing. Some of the other, I'm trying to think through some of the bad surprises. I think one of them was that I didn't know how disjointed our policies were. I think we could have carried on for the next 15 years with disjointed policies, but I feel so much better about them now than I did previously. And so do all of our elders. They're incredibly thankful for the work that was done. And but I think we were all surprised at the disjointedness from that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy. For some of you who are new on the theme related to child protection, let me just I should have done this earlier on, perhaps, but give you 5 categories as kind of a framework to hang your thoughts on related to child protection. And these are really the outline or the categories of the ECAP standards. Governance, we believe that child protection starts with good and godly governance. We talk about child safety operations, and this would involve aspects like checking in and checking out younger children, policies related to transporting kids to an athletic event or to camp. 3 would ECAP all employees within the organization to be screened and trained, and all volunteers that work with minors or with children. The 4th category is training. What does that abuse prevention training look like? And then the 5th category is a response plan. We want to encourage you to have a response plan before there's an allegation of abuse, so that your church, your ministry, your school is prepared to respond when that happens. 2 resources I'm going to ask Brigham to drop into the chat for us that we've developed to be a resource for you. This also helps you in reaching ECAP accreditation. Number 1, we have a list of questions. Now, ECAP doesn't specify every question that you need to ask, but you need to have a designated list of questions that you ask when you're interviewing workers. And so we've got a list of those questions to get you started. And I'm going to ask a question to Jeremy here in 1 second. There's another resource that I'm asking to share. Is a code of conduct. So we do a worker code of conduct as a starting that you can use for your workers. Jeremy, pornography is a problem in our culture, and as Bible-believing, gospel-loving Christians, we certainly understand what the Bible says about this in our society, and even some of it being connected to abuse. It's kind of a controversial question in screening of workers. does your church ask this question? And how do you, and maybe it's just a simple no, but have you thought about that question, and why or why not do you ask that?
Yeah, it is a controversial question. Let's answer it. We do. We ask that question, and we do so because that's part of somebody's testimony. If that's something they struggle with, that's not the end of the conversation. There's so much freedom that's found in confessing our sins, and so we start with this. This is part of the conversation that we have with people, and so the joy of an interview is they've already done the application, and so the application asks that question, and then we go through the application with the person that we're interviewing, and so we even so in our volunteer application, we ask the question, and then there's a parentheses next to every single question except one that says answering yes to this does not disqualify you from serving. And so a really fun story, at the same time heartbreaking because it is sin. But we had a volunteer who had been serving with us for about 6 months, and he came to me and he said, "Hey, I need to step out of the ministry. I slipped and I looked at pornography the other day. I confessed this to my community group and to my accountability partner, and so we're dealing with it, but I need to step away." And so I thankfully God gave me the insight to be able to see that for what it is. And I said, "Man, first, let me say how sorry I am that that's what you fell into. Second, praise God that you were there, that you were in community enough, and you were open and honest enough with people that you weren't busted with it, but that you fell and you confessed, and there's restoration. You are more than welcome to take a break from the ministry, but just know that one instance of you falling does not disqualify you in this moment. If you want to take a season and rest and be restored, man, go do that. And if you want to continue on and you want support, and I'm happy to check in as well with you, then let's keep going. We're going to worship God together through that. That is one sin of many that our people constantly commit. On a daily basis, sin is committed, and to think that that is an automatic disqualifier would be really, I think, short-sighted of what the power of the cross is. And so a couple of caveats to this conversation. Did you look at child pornography was asked, and the answer was no. Okay, praise God. Let's keep going. The only question on the volunteer application that doesn't have an answer of yes does not disqualify you is, have you abused a child? And that's going to be an automatic disqualifier. There are other ministries that you should serve in. We would be happy to get you started in those, but children's ministry won't be for you.
Thank you. Great question. And just a note, that is a suggested best practice to ask about pornography, but it is not required for ECAP accreditation. And that was largely due to our legal review team that had mixed feelings about it. They want the question asked, but we also understand it is difficult. It's difficult for some to be able to even ask the question, let alone answer it. But we're grateful for the shepherding opportunities that we're hearing from ministries who are asking the question. It's being addressed, and there's resources. I'm just learning about Focus on the Family has got connections to sexual integrity. I'll put that in the chat here. Let me look it up. But they're actually hosting a conference here in Jacksonville. There's their annual event. I'll put it in the chat. But anyways, there's some good resources out there for help in this issue. I'm going to ask Jesse a question here. Jesse, talk a little bit about the audit process. Let's say internally, we as a ministry, we've demonstrated compliance. We've used the checklists, which we'll share here momentarily with links to. we're ready to go. What does that audit process look like from ECAP?
I'm happy to discuss that. That's so the first thing we need is documentation, something to audit. And so leading up to the audit, you've asked yourselves the question, are we in compliance and can we prove it? And when you believe that using our resources, that both those answers are yes for everything that applies in your ministry, then you provide us a document package that we can then audit that includes samples of that proof and copies of your policies. So then we hired 2 auditors, independent, qualified, trained, screened, and they go have a 2-week process to conduct what we call a remote assessment. It sounds like a desk audit. And they look at what you provided us and they ask themselves the same question that you ask yourself. Are they in compliance? Can they prove it, or have they proven it? And so then you get an independent verification or validation that your sample documentation, your policies, procedures do indeed prove that you're in compliance. At the end of that, they produce what we call a preliminary report, and it's just the draft of their final report. It covers roughly 90% of our indicators, and it says, lays out how you've proven it, and if they have any questions. We then would approach you and say, hey, we have these questions. You owed us 5 of these. You gave us 4 maybe, or this is a bit unclear. You have the opportunity to respond. And when we know that that's complete and everything indicates compliance, then we move on to a validation visit. And those same 2 people come to your site or sites, generally 2 days, and 2 people, and observe what could not be validated remotely, and as well as performing some interviews. You get to know the questions ahead of time. You pick who's interviewed, but we want to interview an assortment of a variety of people there at the ministry, at least a leader and your child safety coordinator, as well as a parent and maybe another worker, but give our auditors the opportunity to, again, validate what couldn't be done remotely. And at the end of that, they come back, they complete their report, and then if it's presented to me, I review it for completion. And then when I'm convinced that it's clear and complete, then they sign it, and then you would get a copy, and it goes up to our accreditation committee for review.
That's great. And yeah, thank you, Jesse. Really appreciate that. What we prize about the ECAP accreditation process is that it is an independent audit. So you can self-declare all day long, and certainly there's value there, but having outsiders come in and verify that you do those things. Of course, we're looking for auditors. If you're interested in serving as an auditor, maybe Brigham can drop the link into the page, but we're recruiting now for auditors across the country. Some of the side benefits, unanticipated benefits that we've seen are the auditors that we select who've served with other ministries, and Jeremy's done audits for us and others. They've really benefited from the opportunity to go into another ministry and to learn how they do things and what tools and resources and information they develop has helped them take that information back home, and really has been an accelerant of some sort to help them move forward in their work in building up the Child Protection Program and preparing for the ECAP audit. There's another question here, Jeremy, about the pornography question that you use on the application, or is that, do you ask it in the application, or are you asking the question in an interview?
Yes to both. We ask it in the application, which happens before the interview in our situation. And so on our actual application, which they fill out online, we ask the question. To give a little bit of background, we tried to simplify this application. I think I had it up to probably 40 or 50 questions because we had so much that we wanted to dig into, which helped us with the interview process. And we started simplifying it. So the way that we phrase this question specifically is, have you ever had an addiction, past or present, with drugs, alcohol, or pornography? And what that did was, and so if they say no, then it goes on to the next question. If they say yes, and again, with the caveat of checking yes does not automatically disqualify you from serving in this ministry, but if they check yes, a little drop box comes down, a little text box drops down and says, if yes, please explain. And it that opens up the door. That one question opens up the door to so much insight into a person's life. Are they, are they at a place in their spiritual walk where they can acknowledge that they have these struggles and that the cross is still bigger than that, but we still live in a fallen world? Or is there more coaching that needs to be done on the spiritual side? It's so great to ask some of these questions because you get into deeply spiritual conversations of healing and restoration and counseling that I think we miss out on as a church if we don't ask these questions. And so it really is a beautiful thing to be able to know your people as a shepherd. You want to know your sheep. And so do you know who your sheep are? Can you feed them with the word? Can you, protect them and help them to battle the enemy? And I think pornography is one of those that is so easy to hide. And when you see people being open and honest and vulnerable, man, it's a beautiful thing to see God at work that way.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, you're referencing your context, right? Which is a church context, and shepherding is the main thing that you do. I'm guessing, right? The spirit of Colossians 8. I'm in another school or a camp that could potentially be. Sure, shepherding opportunities can happen in those contexts as well, but might be more challenging in those contexts. So we just want to recognize that for the different settings. Something we get asked on a pretty regular basis is, what about integrating a sex offender into our ministry? I'll just mention this briefly. I think we do have some resources available, maybe not on our website, but contact us. We've got a packet of information we can share with you. First of all, I would say that's really a calling specifically for some churches. And I'm trying to use that language carefully. A Christian school that's serving kids really there should never be a place for a sex offender in that organization, according to ECAP standards. So it's only some churches that would be called to that. And I'm specifically saying some and called because of the intentionality and the resources dedicated to manage that properly. So if that's your situation, and perhaps you have a sex offender that regularly attends or might be a member at your church, contact us and we will, there's a link in the chat. Thank you so much, Brigham. That's a great place to start, just to think carefully about what it takes to care for that individual. There's some organizations that take a very strict line on this and say that sex offenders should never be invited back into a church. So this is kind of another controversial topic. And so we want you to think very, very carefully, if that is your calling as a church, to consider these aspects in that sex offender integration. All right. We're going to wrap up here in just a few more minutes, but we want you to know that here at ECAP, we have dedicated our ministry to supporting you in this topic. We're an association-based ministry, and we're here to serve you in your child protection efforts. Of course, we're hoping that you will consider seriously accreditation. And now that we're open for business, we'd like to encourage you to apply for this now. Don't wait until you're internally compliant and you're ready for an audit, and tap into the growing network of resources that we're bringing to bear on this issue to support you in this work. We're negotiating with our affiliate members to provide free or deeply discounted resources to support this. And so that's one of many reasons why you'd want to join early on. The process, we're working hard to keep this affordable to you all. So the application fee is $300. And then you can see on our accreditation landing page the rates for ministries based on the size and scope of your organization. We're looking at factors like your attendance, participants, the number of campuses, and different divisions of ministry. For example, a church that also has a Christian school a part of it. We're looking at some of those factors in the accreditation process. The process, I think Jesse covered this, but you do an initial accreditation with an on-site visit. 12 months later is a remote audit. And then 12 months after that, we're back on campus. And so that becomes the rhythm. Every other year, we're doing an on-campus audit of your ministry programs. There's some larger ministries that we're having conversations with where they potentially would have multiple audits even in the year. I think for that really doesn't apply. The Start Here link that we've created really as, this is a big and complex, and we wanted to give you some very, very simple next steps to move forward. What I'd like to encourage you is, like I said, to become a candidate member, but start by assessing your ministry. Click on that button there. They're free checklists. It's entirely confidential. That's just checklists that you would print off and to share with your leadership. But the intention there is, as you do that assessment, you're going to find yourself probably in one of three categories. You're going to find yourself, we do these things in child protection and we have the evidence to prove it. Or a second bucket might be, we do these things, but we don't have any evidence to prove that we do it. Or the third is, we don't do it, and obviously there's no evidence, right? So you're going to fall into one of those buckets as you build out your child protection program. We'd like to encourage you to start by using that assessment tool, learn more about accreditation, review more about the process, contact us with any questions. Jesse, myself, Brigham, Jeremy, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot too. I think you'd be willing to answer some questions if anyone wanted some more perspective from you at a local church level. But we're here to support you in this endeavor. Also, if you end up with a situation which we get frequently and sadly contacted about, if you find out you're in a situation with an allegation of abuse, remember your mandatory reporter laws. That's something that we get on a regular basis. Ministry leaders are often not aware of the mandatory reporter laws in the state where their ministry is taking place. And if you're part of a summer camp and you might travel from Florida to, say, Georgia, you need to be aware of what Georgia's mandatory reporter laws are. So there's a link, thank you, Brigham, where you can check the mandatory reporter laws across the country. So there's some more information. There's who we are and what we do. We again want to help you in this endeavor to reach accreditation, not for the sake of accreditation, but for the sake of the vulnerable, the children in your midst, that they can hear the gospel and to grow in relationship with Christ and in discipleship. So thanks again for joining us today. We'll make sure to make a copy of this recording on our YouTube channel in the near future for future reference. And I also want to draw your attention to a couple of other events that we have in the works. We're rolling out a new virtual program called Meet the Experts with ECAP, and we are thrilled to have Julie Lowe join us. She's the author of Safeguards, which is also the book of the month we're giving away to those that apply for accreditation in the month of January. So get a free copy of Safeguards. Julie Lowe's with CCEF, and we're going to do an hour with her on March 2nd. So this will be coming on our website here in the next few days, but mark your calendars for a free virtual event where we'll have Julie Lowe come in, talk about Safeguards, and you'll get to ask her questions. Also, March 22nd, we'll have Dr. Michael Kruger, the president of RTS Charlotte, who wrote a recent book called Bully Pulpit. So you want to mark your calendars. Those are both 4 p.m. Eastern time or 1 o'clock for our friends on the West Coast. So that's Meet the Experts, and we're planning to do those virtual events monthly throughout the year. So stay tuned for more. We're also working on a series of child protection training events for leaders, ministry leaders, administrators across the country. We'll also be at the Southern Baptist Convention. So if you're a part of an SBC church, and we'll be at the annual meeting in New Orleans, be sure to find us there. And we'll also be at the EFCA, Church of America, EFCA 1 event at Chuck Swindoll's old church in Fullerton, California. So if we can serve, please reach out. We're here to be a resource for you. Really appreciate your time today. Hope this has been helpful. And we thank you for your time. God bless you. Take care.